Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to give you a fair warning right out the outset. This this might be a rough live stream, only because the internet's been really goofy the last 2 days. I tried doing a live uh, Zoom meeting yesterday, and we had to stop it and then go with a old-fashioned phone call. But if I haven't mentioned this before, we live in between 80 acres of corn. I think it's corn this year, and then we have 20 acres of soybeans over on that side. So I think we'll get through it, but I just want to give you a fair warning because if there's any buffering, that's what's going on, and I can't control the internet. So sounds like the audio is doing fine, so I'm happy with that. And I can already tell that this is going to be fun with the buffering, but I'm gonna try to bring as much value to you today, and we're gonna we're gonna do the best job we can with a sketchy internet. So I guess we'll pretend this is the infant days of the internet, and say it's like 1996. We have a dial-up modem. I just dated myself too. Um, so this is gonna be interesting because I wanted to show you a quick video from this last week. I know you've probably been itching to see my live gardens. I've been talking about the programs that I do for the senior living communities last few weeks, but I started this week off with a garden installation. So this is what these look like, and I wanted to show you what these look like. So I'm gonna try to run this video. It might be a little bit choppy, but you're gonna get to see one of these right now. Okay, so I think we'll do this. I can narrate while I run this video. This might help a little bit better with it being kind of choppy. So right now I've already gotten the garden set up, and what you see is the water timer that I use. That's an Orbit water timer. I don't know if you have one of these. They do very well for this type of garden setup. And honestly, I've been using these for about five, 6 years now. And occasionally I'll have some issues where it's typically there's a screen on the inlet to these water timers. They're Orbit water timers, and I've done a separate video on how to set these up. But typically, if I have any issues with them, it's because the screen on the inlet side of the timer will get plugged up, and it's as simple as unthreading the water timer and then cleaning the screen off and then hooking it back up and then letting her rip. So right now the garden's already set up, and as soon as I get play the video again, you'll see it. But I'm doing the final checks on the irrigation system for there. There's going to be 2 garden beds that you'll see. And since this is a commercial property, they have that goofy looking key that you need to turn the lock on. So what I just did there is really fast, but on these Orbit water timers, there's a manual button. You see the 3 buttons on the left? The one on the bottom is manual. All you have to do is push that once. It defaults to 10, 10 minutes. So I usually hit that once. It starts the water timer flowing, and then I can check for leaks or check for flow, adjust flow rates to the grow beds. So you'll see that here as soon as I stop talking. So right here, this customer is it's a therapy clinic. So they have occupational therapist and speech therapist, and they just got done with renovation here last year. So I did have my garden set up for them, but it was a completely different system because that water spigot that I just hooked up the irrigation system to, that was unavailable last year. In fact, I think we had to stay 25, 30 feet away from the building because they were working on the exterior of the building also. So I didn't have any city water to irrigate these grow beds last year. What we ended up doing was we used a gravity-fed rain barrel, and that orbit water timer that I had that I just showed in this last clip, I wasn't able to use that last year because that one requires a positive pressure. So I started using I think it's Toro brand water timers. They're actually marketed as a zero PSI water timer, and I was able to use that with the gravity-fed irrigation system, and it worked out well. But now we're using city water again, so this is one of the first beds, and you'll see I'm going to be lifting up a bag so I can check the water flow. And I've talked about this a lot here on these live streams, but now you get to actually see what this looks like. But this is a simple setup where I got that half-inch irrigation line, and then it just runs into the bed. I actually have the grow bag sitting on that irrigation line, and then they can flood that bed in a couple of minutes, and that's it. That's all I do after that point is depending on the season, depending on the temperature and the humidity, I can manipulate the length of time that it floods the tray and then the frequency. So if we have a super hot, dry summer, uh, I can lengthen the time that it floods the bed. But honestly, I'm usually tapped out after a few minutes because that bed's about an inch deep and then it'll just overflow. What I typically do is I'll increase the frequency. So we'll go to once a day. Right now, since we're in spring temperatures, I'll do every 2 days. It'll flood that bed. When and next week we're getting up to 90, so I may need to adjust this already, which is crazy. But I've been alluding to this for the last month. Is that it's very possible that this time of the year we might be in the 90s, and I already saw the forecast for 90s. So anyway, that's all I did on that one is check, make sure we had good water flow. And then here's the other one with the sugar snap peas. You can see the water trickling out on the far side, which I'm going to go over and look at now. And then I have a simple valve. You can kind of see there's a valve at the end of that tube that I use to control the water flow to each bed. So it's really simple. All I need is that half-inch hose, the poly tube run into each bed with a valve, and I can control the flow rate to each one. And in the past, I think I've mentioned this, when I first started doing this, I had drip irrigation to each grow bag, and it worked, but it was so labor intensive that it didn't make sense to do that at scale. So now what I just did is I clicked that manual button again, and it turned the manual feature off, and now you see me rotating the dial. And that's what I love about these Orbit water timers is that they're super easy to set up. You just have that one big dial. You can roll through the functions, and as soon as you move the dial, it saves the parameters that you just plugged into it. So that's what I'm going to do now in here is run through the frequency, the time for watering, also the time of day, the time that it is right now, and there's a couple other settings too. So now that's set. So now I'm gonna go back to that low grow bed with the strawberries, and I have some edible flowers in it too. And I've talked about row covers a bunch of times. You're gonna see me get the row cover set up on here. I don't have a row cover set up. I don't have a row cover set up on the top or the higher raised bed, the cedar galvanized metal one, just because that one's higher off the ground, so I don't have to worry about bunnies. I know these guys have a bunny here. all I do with the row covers, just tuck them underneath the grow bags and then they do their thing. Yep, one last check on the tall raised bed, and then that's it. So yeah, yeah, Jay, that's why I wanted to give you a fair warning that I wasn't sure how I was gonna work with the internet being kind of sketchy today, but that's okay. I think you can at least see kind of how those grow beds set up. Now I pulled my phone out so I could take a couple of notes on there. But yeah, so that's how I started off this week is getting that customers those two grow beds set up. And if I haven't really explained this in the past, I think this is an appropriate time to explain how this works for the raised actual garden beds that you see from my customers. I based it off of a CSA model originally, so now I've kind of evolved to a different type of system. But originally, this wasn't really my idea. I originally started off selling grow bag plants at farmers markets, and I had customers ask me to put like a package deal together, so like multiple grow bags, basically multiple container garden bags. And I had one customer asked for a package deal where we could put like some peppers, tomatoes, maybe some basil, cilantro. Basically, they were asking for like a salsa garden, which I was kind of already thinking about that, but I was happy that I had that customer in particular that was asking for something like that. So uh, I I've had like a very specific definition of what I do and what I don't do. And what I don't do is I don't do the traditional garden install. So there's a lot of companies here in Minnesota also, but across the United States and I'm sure in other countries where they do foodscaping or they do edible garden installations. I'm commonly asked to do stuff like that, and I stay away from that just because it's so labor intensive. And honestly, there's enough companies that do that already to where I don't it's just not something I'm focusing on. So my super niche is I'm a mobile garden. So with all my customers where I set up gardens, I can set up gardens like you saw, just kind of over by the fence where it's got a sunny spot. I've done gardens on cement slabs, sidewalks, patios, driveways. I have lots of driveway gardens, spaces that you wouldn't traditionally put a garden. uh, and a lot of my customers don't have good gardening soil, so if you do have really rich organic garden soil, if you're growing in traditional beds in the ground, or even raised beds that have really rich nutritious soil, then you're blessed, and you're not my customer. So that's kind of where I'm at is I grow for people or customers who um, don't have the ability to grow food, or like you saw with the clinic, I have something that's very functional for their use. So something that I changed this year for that garden in particular, just from customer request, was last year I stuffed a bunch of different types of plants in one grow bed. And as you saw, there were two levels of heights, grow beds. I had that cedar metal raised bed, and then I had that low raised bed with the cedar planks on the side. And if you're wondering, those cedar planks, those are actually cedar fence pickets. So that's something, if you ever wanted to build something like what you saw, those are really inexpensive. They're only a few dollars per 6 foot cedar plank for fencing. And then I need four of those. I trim them off and then I actually screw those to a pallet. So that low one, what you saw, that was an actual plastic recycled pallet that may not have gone back into use as a pallet, may have gone in. I don't know if they're recyclable or they can be recyclable or recycled, but I buy those for a few dollars per pallet, and then I turn those into what you saw. So I'm always looking for stuff like that to where I can reuse something as a grow bed, something that's lightweight, inexpensive, sturdy. So that's the one requirement because once I get those bags on the pallets or whatever system I'm using, there is considerable weight. Even though each grow bag is maybe 30, 40 pounds for the 10 gallons with water, once they start growing and they get that foliage or fruit on there, they're going to get significantly heavier. So I'm always looking for something that's inexpensive, easy to work with, and then also can hold the weight of a garden. So but anyway, back to the CSA model. So when I was originally asked about doing a package deal, I was thinking about how I would go about fulfilling that and what that would look like. And the closest thing that I saw that would work would be kind of like a CSA model that's been in existence for decades. So if you're not familiar with the CSA, that's a community supported agriculture. It's basically where you team up with a farmer or a grower. Pellets are supposed to be upcycled or reused, but it's mixed about how much that happens. Yeah, that's exactly what I was I was wondering. So if I can save a pallet from the landfill, then yeah, we're gonna do it. And the nicest, I'm just getting on this little side note here. The nicest part about those plastic pallets, I've used wood pallets in the past too, but they have a shelf life, I guess, so to speak, because at some point they're gonna rot out. But with the plastic, they're going to last for years and years and years. And once I get those set up to use as a grow bed, uh, I I'll mention this quick fact too. The material that I use for the bed, the liner, you see that black liner that was flooding. When I first started doing this 4 years ago, I just very quick because I put these together very quick. I used wood pallets or I use plywood that actually just cut half a sheet of 4 by 8 foot plywood, and then I just wrap it in like 6 mil black plastic from the hardware store, and that worked for 1 year, and then the plastic was done because most of that plastic wasn't UV resistant, so it was just degrading after a year. So I looked for heavier duty material, and what I found was hydroponic liner. So that stuff is, I think, 20 mil, so it's very thick. It's specifically designed for hydroponic use, and because of that, it's UV stable. So that bed that I just did or showed in the video, that I built that last year before the growing season. So this is the second year it's going to go into use, and I expect this to be used for the next 7 years at least, which is nice because what that means is I build it once, and then I don't have to worry about it for years and years and years. And I just store those in my barn over the winter and the springtime. So what I did last month is I cleaned all these beds up, and then it just they weigh like maybe 7, 10 pounds. They're not very heavy at all. Just throw those out on the customer's whatever location, sidewalk, or driveway, or whatnot, and then drop the plants, run the irrigation lines, fire up the irrigation, and away we grow. So, but anyway, the CSA model, I I was thinking I could actually use something like that because that was the easiest to sell, and something as a small business owner is I have constantly have to think about my sales approach and how I communicate. So if you've never sold something to another person and asked for money in exchange for what you're giving to them, that's a whole different skill set. And what I quickly found out with doing grow bags is that grow bags, or just selling a grow bag with a plant at a farmer's market or a weekend market is not a normal item, and that's awesome, but it also has a downside. The awesome part is that it's kind of human psychology where it strikes the novelty chord. So we as humans, psychology wise, or this is something I've studied too, is we're always looking out for like novelty or things that are out of the normal. And as I understand it, if anybody is big into psychology in this audience so far, please correct me or feel free to add some information. But that's that amygdala. So our lizard brain in the back of our heads is always looking for threats. So anything that's not in the normal, we're gonna like pay attention to. So what I found out the first year in 2020 when I showed up to the first farmer's market selling the grow bag, was that I immediately got attention. So that was very cool because I was wondering if I could even sell a plant in a grow bag because it's so different. But I immediately had attention from customers at the market because it was so unique and so different. So just, going to the market every weekend and seeing the same type of uh, plants being offered in maybe those plastic pots that you see at the big box stores or commercial nurseries. And then I show up with a grow bag and I tell a customer all you need to do is water it and put it in sunlight and that's all you have to do. That was an easy thing to explain for that. But when I went to try to pitch the garden or the package deal, that was a lot harder because there's nothing that I knew of at the time in existence that I could relate it to other than the CSA. So how I would originally approach this is I would ask the potential customer if they were familiar with the CSA business model, to where you team up with a farmer or a grower, they grow your vegetables and you get so much or percentage each week or a box of mixed vegetables or whatnot. So that's how I related originally, but then I also flip-flopped that business model. So instead of coming out to me at the plant nursery or the farm for a traditional CSA, I would bring the farm or the CSA garden to my customer's location, set it up like you saw in that video, and then they would have to go, all they'd have to do is go out and harvest the food. I took care of all the irrigation, all the fertilizer, the any rigging, so trellises, or I like to use bamboo stakes and poles because they look pretty and they're functionally they work very well. So basically, I made it as much of a automatic or autopilot garden as possible for my customers, so they could have uh, not 100% guaranteed, but we could stack the deck in their favor as far as having a successful growing experience or a successful gardening experience, which just at face value is insane. And many times when I was starting this, I questioned my own sanity because what I was basically doing was growing food at 15 or more locations at one time and trying to manage all these ones because you're talking about a dozen, 15 or more microclimates. So even in one town, you might have multiple microclimates depending on if that house has a more southern exposure versus eastern or western exposure, or maybe even partially northern exposure. If they have a house next to that garden, if they have a neighbor that likes to spray herbicides, and then that drifts over to the garden and causes damage, like all these things, like I had to think about because in order to have a successful garden, you have to think about this stuff. And then that's just at the face value. Then on top of that, we go to one more layer. You're talking about like pest and disease pressures. And even in one town of like 20,000 people here in Northfield, Minnesota, uh, different pests and disease pressures are at different locations. And that sounds kind of crazy, but I've seen it firsthand. I might have at one location a problem with Japanese beetles attacking potato and tomato plants, and then the same type of garden, but on the other side of town, I don't have any pressure with that. So, uh, yeah, I, it's exciting. The good part about this whole story is that I was able to like exponentially increase my growing knowledge with running that many gardens simultaneously, and keep them all running. It's like running plates or basketballs. If you ever saw the Harlem Globetrotters spinning a bunch of different basketballs at the same time, that's what it kind of feels like juggling all these gardens. Um, but yeah, so JBot Ecology Today says I studied about 40 psychology courses. My understanding is that the trigger is novelty is an accident brain survival mechanism. Yeah, thank you for that. And I might ask you some questions in further live streams too, because that's how I understand it too, is the survival mechanism. Um, but anyway, yeah. So the the to kind of finish with the CSA model, that was the easiest way that I found that I could try to explain what I was doing for a potential customer by relating it to the already established CSA model, but I flip-flopped the business model. Um, and that was a really big pain point. So I'm kind of curious to know if you've experienced the same thing with your gardening or growing wherever you're at. And for a lot of my customers, time is a huge hindrance to gardening successfully. And even this time of the year where we're still in our spring garden phase, where we're establishing the garden for the rest of this growing season, it may be okay now, but here in a couple of months when everybody likes to take their summer vacations or trips or they have summer activities going on, it gets really busy. Next thing you know, you go into your garden and it's overcome with pests, disease, weeds, something went south or sideways, and now you have a plant that's like on life support. So the time aspect was a huge thing that and I still constantly think about how can I reduce the time involved or required for a customer or a client to have a successful growing experience. Um, and that's something that I've seen a lot of YouTube videos or a lot of creators don't necessarily always talk about that element. And from what I've seen, time is like on the uh, top five biggest pain points for people even wanting to garden because a lot of people who want to garden just don't because they think that they're going to be spending hours and hours out pulling weeds, which isn't totally wrong if you have your garden set up in a certain way, but there are ways to set up a garden so you don't have to spend hours and hours and hours each week pulling weeds. So that's something else too I like to do is even if I'm not directly helping a client with a garden, just sharing that information on how can we shorten the time required for weeding or maintenance in the garden, because the less time we have to spend maintaining the garden, the more time we can spend enjoying that garden. Because when you really get down to it, that's what we all want is we want a successful garden that we can eat out of if it's an edible garden or to enjoy. I mean, for me personally, that's what I love is just the morning chores of plant checks to make sure that the plants are thriving. That's like my zen. So my morning routine, I'm kind of curious to know what your morning routine is like. I usually wake up in the morning, I do a quick workout, and for me, I just like to do 100. So I'll do 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 flutter kicks, something like that, and then I'll make coffee, and then I'll go out and just start inspecting plants for the day. And then that's my meditation zen place is just being with the plants. And that's plants in the basement, plants in the shop, plants in the hoop house, plants on the side of the barn. There are plants everywhere here, and it's a very beautiful experience, and that's how I start my morning. So, but I'd really love to hear with your own gardens, your own gardening experience, how you start your morning, because I think that's it's a very personal experience, but I'm truly curious to know how you start your days, if it is with your garden and a cup of coffee, or just taking in that whole experience of a spring thriving garden. So I got to get back to the chats here so I can see. I noticed there's a bunch of stuff in there. So, hey David with Bowtie Life, Triple G, greetings, global gardeners from Old Destin, where Gulf waters are nearing 80 degrees Fahrenheit. That is crazy warm. 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And the mammoth melting sugar snow peas are packed away in the freezer. Nice. Just harvested nearly 3 pounds of blueberries. That's fantastic. Okay. Yeah, Andy's a bit dodgy. Yeah, that's our lovely internet today that I don't control. We're at the mercy of the internet signal here today. And I have near zero chance of ever getting fiber optic to my house because of where we live. We're just in a very rural spot in Minnesota. I will say that it is nice many days being in this rural of a spot in Minnesota, only because if you remember those old Verizon, and this is not a plug for Verizon, even though we do have Verizon, for one of our carriers on our cell phone. But if you remember those old commercials where they said, "Can you hear me now?" What I love is that out at our house, sometimes you can't hear me now on that Verizon network, which is also why we don't have Verizon for our home internet. It's just we're in a weird spot. Um, Part of that too, with being so rural, is that it's very peaceful out here. So in the mornings when I'm checking plants, or even in the evening when we're just sitting out on the porch or patio, it's very peaceful out here, and we don't have the hustle bustle of the city, which I'm not knocking the city, but it's just very peaceful out here, which I appreciate. So Dave with Bowtie Life says, after coffee, I like a walk through around the house. Yeah, yeah, yeah. See, Ecology Today says my gardens are just getting built up, no plants yet. That's okay. Yep. And we're still in the spring season, so there's really no rush. From what I do too with how I approach gardening here in Minnesota, especially for my clients, is there's different ways to garden. I try to follow the natural rhythm of Minnesota, the climate, which is going to be very similar for the whole upper Midwest, where instead of planting everything right now, I have it kind of staggered. So I like to really make May the month of the sugar snap pea, and all the spring plants, vegetables, fruiting plants that thrive here in Minnesota in the month of May. And then when we roll into June, so here in just over a week, we're going to be into June, and this next week we're going to have 90s already, which is it's what it is. But June is when I start to roll into or get the summer plants established. So uh, tomatoes, peppers are getting transplanted this next week. Some other stuff, but I try to approach it as seasonality to it with a defined month. And then as we get into July, that's going to be all the spring stuff's done. We're fully at the summer. But the nice thing about where we live is that even if it warms up really fast at the late spring or this time of the year, we have two chances at it. So I think I've mentioned this in past live streams, but if you're in a climate that's super cold over winter, and we get shortchanged on the spring cooler temperatures, it's okay because you get a second or chance or a redo at the end of the season. And I tried this or I think 4 years ago, where I tried to do some fall sowing or get plants set up for fall harvesting. And one of those was sugar snap peas again. Last year, I kind of transitioned from sugar snap peas to shelling peas just for one of those novelty, different types of experiences for my customers. And that worked really well. And my advice with that is if you are in a cooler region and you want to do something like that, start those fall plants sooner than you think, because that was what I screwed up the first year. Or maybe I didn't screw it up. I just didn't have as full a harvest as I wanted to for my customers and for us personally. And what happened was it wasn't the temperature. The temperature is naturally going to decline as the season goes on, as we get into September and October. It's the amount of light. So as we get later into the year, everybody knows we lose sunlight, and since we're further north, it's going to be more pronounced than it is if you're closer to the equator. So what happened is, even though the seed packet gave me a window for dates to start a fall sowing of peas or whatever plant I was doing, I planted towards the end of that. And what that meant was like the pea plants that I had like maybe a half a harvest instead of like a full harvest. So it wasn't a total bummer, but what I learned from that experience is that I need to start those plants on as early as I can for fall sowing, because we need to get, just like I've talked in live streams before, we need to get the plant through the vegetative stage as quickly and efficiently as possible so it can build its framework to then flower and fruit. So if we get to like September and we're already losing quite a bit of sunlight and the plant is still growing through its vegetative stage, by the time we get to mid-September or even late September, we're just running out of sunlight. So especially when we get to October, if the plant hasn't already started to produce those sugar snap peas or the shelling peas, or maybe let's just say some leafy greens like kale. Kale's of course not going to flower because it's a biennial, but we're not gonna have a full harvest of that when we roll into the end of September or into October because we ran out of sunlight. So I've pushed gardens here in Minnesota all the way up to November, and they do fine, especially the cool season plants that could take a frost or a freeze. Parsley is one herb that I love because that one's kind of freaky. Just with a couple simple frost blankets, it can easily go down into the high teens, which is typically what we have in October, November here in Minnesota. But by November, we just don't have enough sunlight, so even if we had a warm month for that month, we're just not going to get the growth out of that plant. Unless you start to do some other stuff like cold frames, which I won't talk about right now, but there's always options around the Mother Nature. So we're collecting. Wickershire project says we're collecting peas, pole beans, zucchini. Wow. Cucumbers are on the way next. Tomatoes have flowers. Fantastic. See, bow tie life. David says back in Arkansas we lived 9.8 miles from the last wired connection for internet. Yeah, that's what it kind of feels like here. And I think we're 5 miles from town. It's something like that. See, just had a frost up in Canada. Yeah. God bless you if you still have frost right now. Although I have seen two really wicked snowstorms here in Minnesota in the past, so um, in May, mid-May. So it is possible. See, Wickershire Project says I have the direct sow, no greenhouse. Yep, that works if you can if you have the setup for it. David, I am still at least 4 months away from fall weather. Most fall planting doesn't start here till beginning of September. Okay, yeah, that's good to know. That's something I'm always interested to learn on how different climates, especially the southern uh, climates like down where you're at, how they plan their gardens throughout the year. See, Wickershire says our cucumbers are producing mass flowers. I just spend a good half hour out there picking them all off. I need vine first. Yep. And then Wickershire, I'm curious to know for you too. Do you have to hand pollinate any of your cucumber plants, or do you have quite a bit of pollinator activity in your area? I've spoken briefly about that in the past, but when we first moved into this acreage, we bought what used to be the farmstead. So I always talk about the corn, the 80 acres of corn over here. But this was all monoculture farm. We bought the farmstead, so we have the house, the barn, a couple of outbuildings, and basically the residence. And when we first moved in, I did not see a lot of pollinator activity at all. The last owner, and this was just their preference, they used 2,4-D, so they wanted the grass. So the grass was relatively weed free, not a lot of dandelions or clover, not a lot of anything really. There was really no incentive to come out to this property if you were a bumblebee or any type of pollinator because there's no food. Now, since we're 2026 now, and that was 2019 when we bought this place, I've mentioned this before. I let my dandelions go to seed, and clover. I actually planted clover when we first moved in because I like clover. The bees like it, and over time, since we have more food here on the property for our pollinator friends, that means we have more pollinators here on the property. So I've definitely seen a lot of honeybee. We have a farm, I think 4 miles that way that has an apple orchard. So we have a couple apple trees here and typically have quite a bit of pollinator activity, honeybees, just because there's an apple orchard here. So when our apple trees bloomed here earlier this month, that those trees came alive with honeybees and then lots of bumblebees on our property. But because of that, I don't really have to worry about my cucumbers and some of my other plants that require pollination that don't have perfect flowers. Um, just because I've encouraged those guys to and gals to, or mostly guys, I guess, to show up and pollinate our cucumbers and squash and pumpkins by giving them that early food, the dandelions and the clover, to incentivize them to come to the property. Okay, David says totally FYI, you're fine. Your videos occasionally glitch. Yeah, yeah, I apologize for that. But I'm glad the sound works nice, so that's the main thing. Hey, Michael from Alabama, nice to see you. Okay, Wickershire says we of the 35 herbs we planted, we have some plants with major success and others with epic failures. Yeah, it happens. Huge learning curve for us. It's all new. Every basil and mint rockets here. Chamomile is good also. That's fantastic. I have chamomile growing also. It's not outside, it's still in seedling trays. I'll probably be, that might be this next week. In fact, I could just roll into this um, next week since we're going to be talking about next week here shortly. See, bumblebee. My vacation plans involve desirable pollinator plants. Okay. Dave says in 9 years we haven't seen a frost past the third week of February. They say our average last frost is between March 15th and March 30th, but that's because across the bay they still get frost. Okay. Yep. Okay, Sarah asks, in new developments, would you want to self-pollinate and for how long? Oh, this is a very good question. Thank you for asking this. Okay, so we can well let's just do this. We're just gonna jump right to the learning in the plant show because this is a great segue into this. Okay, this totally depends on the type of plant that you're growing. And this is a good time to talk about different types of flowers. And I don't have any flowers in there because I was going to talk about something different. Actually, I do have some flowers in there. Let's just get right to the plant show. uh, so what I have are all-star strawberries. These are cuttings. So last week I went through all my strawberry plants. I'm getting to your question, Sarah. This is just the setup to it. I went through all my strawberry plants. All my strawberry plants are in 1 gallon grow bags. I've shown them a couple times on the live streams. And I went through all my plants and I topped them off with, well, it's called top dressing. So top dressing is an interesting term that when I first started getting into this world, I was like, I didn't really understand what they were talking about when I heard the term top dressing. But all top dressing means is you're adding whatever component input, could be fertilizer, could be some type of amendment to the soil, but you're doing it on the top of the soil. So in containers, what that looks like is I went through half of my strawberry plants outside. I looked for any doubled up plants. So some of the runners, because I was so busy last year, some of the runners snuck into other adjacent grow bags and they rooted. So these are the plants that are not supposed to be in those bags. And I cut those off from the mother plant, and then later today and this weekend, I'm going to be popping these up into their own containers. So I'm only saying this because I do have some flowers in there. So they're not open. Actually, this one is right here. So this is a strawberry flower right here. And this is a good time to talk about anatomy of a flower. So you have some different parts of the flower on the outside where you kind of have these goofy looking pom-poms on, they kind of like lollipops. That's the pollen. So like the little puff ball that I'm using very generic elementary verbiage for this. But those are anthers. That's the pollen. So that's the male part, the pollen. And then on the middle, where you see that yellow part, that's the actual strawberry. So that's the female part. So you got the male and the female parts on the same flower. Does anybody know what we call that flower? I'm not going to give it away yet. I'm just curious. So if the male and the female reproductive organs are on the same flower, what's the word we use for that? I got to give this a couple seconds because there's like a 5 second delay in between the time I say something and when it gets to you guys. Okay, so for that strawberry flower, when both the female and the male reproductive organs are on the same flower, that's called a perfect flower. And for a perfect flower, we don't necessarily need pollinators. Of course, it's nice to have the pollinators because they need the nectar from it. Yep, self-pollinate. Yep. Self-pollinate is another term for it, but perfect flower is what we call that. So if you hear self-pollinating or a perfect flower, that's what we're referring to, is that a flower that has both the male and female organs on it. So you got the pollen, then you got the pistil and the stamen, right? If you've heard of those more technical terms. So what that means is that those plants can self-pollinate. They can pollinate from the wind. You can pollinate those from shaking. So you could take a tomato plant, which also has perfect flowers, and you can shake it, and that pollen will be released, and that will pollinate the female parts, and you'll have a successful pollination for that tomato or pepper. So those are some of the popular or the typical garden plants that we grow that have perfect flowers. So strawberries one, tomatoes are another one, peppers are another one. You could talk about other like biannual type plants like kale and whatnot. Anything that's gonna have a flower that's gonna make a seed typically has a perfect flower. You have both the female and the male parts in the same flower. Perfect flower is what those Instagram gardeners call it. Yes. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So for those ones, the bees are going to visit or the pollinators. I like to use pollinator because there's other insects out there or other types of critters that are not bees or in the bee family that will also pollinate these too. And so like for one of those would be like a ladybug, which you might not even think about it, but I've seen ladybugs on my strawberry plants and just them physically being on that flower and like walking around it, they're actually distributing the pollen um, around that flower. So we have the perfect flower, and then we have monoecious. Yeah, yeah, you guys are picking up. So perfect flower. Now, when we get into some other plants like Wickershire Project was talking about cucumbers, now this is a very different type of flower. Then now this is where you should pay attention to if you're growing these types of plants. And those are any type of plant like cucumbers, your squash. So doesn't matter what type of squash you grow, winter squash, summer squash like zucchini. If you're growing melons, watermelon, you're doing honey melon, musk melon, any type of melon, Any of those plants, now we have separated male and female gametes or organs. So, and this is very cool when you start looking at these flowers. And when I first started learning all this, the easy way for me to figure out if I was looking at a male flower or a female flower is if the female flower is going to look like the baby fruit that you're going to harvest later. So let's say summer squash. If you look at a flower and right behind the flower, so on the plant side of that flower, you're going to see like a little squash. It's going to be swollen, and you're actually going to see like a little baby squash. Same thing for cucumbers. You actually see like a little baby cucumber. On the male flowers, you're going to see pollen, but you're not going to see that actual it's going to be a uniform flower. You're not going to see any type of swollen part that looks like that fruit that you're going to harvest. Those plants those plants need to be either hand pollinated or they need to have pollinators. So any of our friends, the bumblebees, the honeybees, ants can do it. Those ladybugs, any other flying insects. If you have wasps around, wasps will do this. I saw wasps on some of my plants this last week before I got them out of the hoop house. And then, but what we need them to do is we need to do the work that we would otherwise have to do. So to bring this full circle back to your question about like a new development, I would watch after you have those plants, so like a cucumber plant, I would watch over the next couple days once those flowers open up to see if you have any visitors there. So let's say you have a cucumber plant, the flowers open up, and 2 days later, or over the course of 2 days, you don't see much pollinator activity. So in the morning, you're out with your coffee, checking plants, and it's just there's not a lot of activity going around that, or there's no evidence that there have been any pollinators that have visited those plants. At that point, you're going to want to hand pollinate, and it can simply be a Q-tip. Some people use paintbrushes, but all you're going to do, or what I also do, the third uh, that I do, some plants have a ton of male flowers, and what I'll do is once that male flower opens up, I'll actually break that male flower off, pull the petals off the flower, and then I'll use that as a paintbrush to go over to the female flowers where the baby fruits are, and then I'll just paint those female flowers to successfully pollinate them. So those are the plants, and they have an imperfect flower. Those are the ones that they either need to be pollinated by our friends, the bees, or other pollinators, or we need to hand pollinate them. So how can you tell if a plant has been successfully pollinated? And this goes for perfect flowers or imperfect flowers like the cucumbers and squash and melons that we just talked about. There is a way that you can tell, and this is kind of one of the science nerdy things that I like, um, because even though our plants don't speak our language like verbally, they do speak to us, and there's tiny clues that we can pick up on to see if these plants are thriving or if they're getting what they need. So before I reveal that, let's see, Wikishire says, have fun teaching my kids the flower differences. I send them out there with Q-tips. That's fantastic. I love that. We call it tickling the plants to make them grow bigger and better. Yep. So back to how does the plant tell us that and like I said, it can be a cucumber. It can also be peppers. It can be beans. How does the plant tell us that it failed to pollinate? So with the biology of a plant, if let's say a cucumber and we'll go cucumber and then we'll do a pepper plant. Uh, that plant is going to tell us that it failed to pollinate because after a certain amount of days, and this varies depending on the type of plant, the species, they have a biological clock. So when the female flower on a cucumber opens up, it's got so many days. Sometimes, depending on the plant, it might have hours, and it needs to be successfully pollinated. If it fails to pollinate, it will abort the flower. So that's how that plant can tell us if it failed to pollinate. If you go out to your cucumber plant or even a bean plant, watermelon plant, and you see a shriveled up little cucumber or a watermelon, or you see flowers that have actually fallen off a tomato plant or pepper plant, those flowers fail to pollinate. And it's not always because our bee friends or pollinators failed to do their job. Sometimes they pollinate a flower, so they kept up their end of the bargain, but the flower still aborts the flowers. This is some stuff or information I want to share with you because this is where we like level up our game on reading our plants and what they're trying to tell us. The environment that that plant is in, any type of environmental stressors, so like freak temperature swings is a popular one. Freak humidity swings is another one. If that plant gets stressed out, it's going to abort the flowers because that plant knows exactly what it needs to survive. And at the end of the day, what its goal is to reproduce. So if it senses that the environment is too harsh to successfully produce the next of kin or its babies, it's going to abort the flower. So that's how a plant can tell us if it didn't pollinate or successfully pollinate is you'll see shriveled up little cucumbers or summer, let's say summer squash or zucchini. It's gonna be on. It's actually gonna like abort it, and you'll see it on the ground underneath that plant. So that's how that plant tells us that it didn't get what it needed, but it can also mean that the growing environment was too harsh for that plant at the time. This is something that I've dealt with, and this is something I wanted to tell you is that I have a new bean variety that I'm growing this year. Beans are warm season plants, and I typically get them going now. So this week I'm actually gonna be starting beans. Uh, and sadly, we have a kind of a harsh environment here in Minnesota. So what I've had last year, which I haven't had in years past, is I've actually had bean flowers abort. So I've had less than optimal uh, success with these bean plants. And I've basically gotten it narrowed down to it was just environmental stressors because beans have perfect flowers, so they don't necessarily need our pollinator friends. But at the time when they were flowering and they should have been pollinated, we had some crazy temperature swings along with humidity swings. So this year I'm growing a different variety, and I don't have that one with me, but it's called Maxigold. It's from Johnny Selected Seeds. It's supposed to be more tolerant of our crazy Minnesota weather. So when I get that plant going, I'm definitely going to share the results with you guys because I'm curious to know myself and run trials this year to see if I have a better success with those plants as far as like overall production value when we get to the hotter months, which start next month or next week already. Okay, Wickershire project, base fruit, I think stays green and the flower drops away. Um, this, this is, so this, what I have seen from my experience, and this might be a case by case with the different types of plant, but what I have experienced is that the actual fruit on that female plant will actually abort just below that. So you'll see like a cucumber flower, a female cucumber flower, like start to well, first thing the petals will start to fall off, and then you'll start to see it like turn brown and shrivel up, and then at some point it'll fall off the plant. What I'm willing to bet though, Wickshire, is that if you actually touch that fruit, it'd probably fall off because at that point the plant has basically said, I'm not going to send any more nutrients to you because we're going to abort this and start over at some other part of the plant. But this is like one of those little nuanced things too. So um, see, we've had a bunch of squash berry varieties abort. Yeah, wilted mini fruit. Yep, yep. This is interesting. Wickershire says, on my peppers, when successful, the fruit bulbs, the flower slowly browns but sticks to the pepper for a bit. Yep. I've always tempted to pull off the flower remains, so Wickshire's talking about the petals. Nature doesn't need me to baby them. That's true. That's true. Yeah. Yep. So it's just one of those like little nuanced details on growing that you start to see and then start to ask why something's happening, and then you find out why it's happening, and then um, there are things that you could do in the future to kind of work around. But honestly, even the best growers, the best farmers, if we have crazy temperature or environment swings, it's just really difficult to grow. And this is why there's a variance in harvest every year. It's just a lot comes down to climate, lot timing, stuff that's out of control. If we have a drought year versus a really wet year, these are all factors. Or if maybe we have more overcast skies this year versus last year or next year, that directly influences how that plant grows too. It's just what it is. So. Wickeshare, thinking having OCD in the garden can become an issue where there was none to begin with. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. Um, but okay, so I have some special plants that I want to share with you at this point in time. So I I'm kind of excited about these because I ordered my first tropical plants this year, and these came from the Growers Exchange. I've never purchased from these guys before. These showed up yesterday, and I'm really excited about them because, like I said, this is my first tropical plants that I've ever ordered and will have grown. So I'm on a learning curve with these. They're inside, and the reason why I'm inside doing this live stream today is because even though it's spring temperatures and it's going to be 70 here today, it's still a little bit too cold outside for these guys. But everything that I saw from the packaging and how these plants arrived, I've been really impressed. One of the hardest parts about mail ordering live plants is the process between the shipper and the buyer or me, and how that plant was packaged and if it can survive the transport from the plant nursery. So this first plant I want to share with you is a ginger plant, and you can see how they package this up. So they had this paper kind of, it was neatly packaged around the stem of this ginger plant. So I had minimal soil that was in the cardboard box. The cardboard packaging that they had in there too, I loved how they had it packaged in there. So these were not going to get jostled around, even though the box was probably not always upright like the arrow said. I had very minimal spillage. The potting soil is great, high quality potting soil. It's still moist, so it didn't dry out. That's another problem I've seen with plants when they get shipped in the mail. Depending on where their location was when they came through, sometimes the potting soil can dry out. These are really healthy looking, and oh yeah, Dave. I think Dave, you and I talked about this because I mentioned I was gonna get my ginger and my other plant. So that's my ginger plant. I have two of these, and then my other plant that tropical plant that I ordered. And of course, since these are tropical plants, they're gonna be inside most of the time here in Minnesota because they have a different temperature threshold that they need to meet to grow. So Wickershire says wild ginger looks nothing like that, and our native wild ginger is strictly a ground covering. I'm gonna have to check that out after the live stream and see wild ginger in your location. uh, Jay says to the new friend Ginger, welcome to the Meg Homestead. Yeah. And then this is my other new to me plant, tropical. This is my turmeric plant. Same thing, they have this really nice white cloth around here to keep all the potting soil in. This plant looks really healthy, and the potting soil didn't dry out either. So looks, I've been really impressed with these guys and how they ship their plants. So David, yes, this is turmeric. So I got two of these also. And then I always like to, I gotta read these comments because there's some helpful information coming. David says our turmeric in ground is starting to come up everywhere. Wikishire says ginger is all fun and games till you bite into it fresh and get that burning wasabi effect. Thanks for the warning. All right, and then I have a couple other plants that I ordered from these guys. One is mojito mint. So this is something I've wanted to grow. I tried to get mojito mint, and I wish there was a way I could share the scent through the internet. Maybe in my lifetime we'll have that technology, but you have to believe me, like this, the flavor from this, the scent from this is awesome. But mojito mint, same type of packaging as the other two plants, and then yeah, that looks really good. And then my last one is a peppermint plant. This is on the smaller size, but same packaging, and got some shoots coming out of here. And yeah, so two mint, two ginger, two turmeric. The I put the turmeric and ginger outside yesterday. We got up into the high 60s, and then I brought them in at night. Um, and I haven't fully decided. I got two of each because I'd like to, and I might change my mind here this week when reality hits me. But so they're super sensitive to temperature. I I bought two of each because I want to grow uh, two outside and then two inside. So one of each outside, one of each inside. The reality is they're gonna have to live inside anyway for most of the Minnesota year. Like I said, I might change my mind. I'm curious to know, you guys, that if any of you grow turmeric or ginger indoors, if you got some advice on that. We do have some house plants here, but these ones are gonna primarily be house plants for the majority of years. So I'm on a learning curve. I'm probably gonna make mistakes, but that's the nature of it. And then I intend to add more tropical plants to my inventory here at the plant nursery, only because as the season goes on, when we get into winter this fall, I intend to bring more tropical plants in to share for my programming with my senior living community clients. And they're just very cool plants anyway, because you're never going to see them here natively in Minnesota just walking outside like, oh, here's a turmeric plant. So that novelty factor here in Minnesota with the ginger and turmeric. I also have some coffee beans that I'm going to get started here pretty soon because I want to have a couple of coffee plants or maybe one. I know they get quite big. Maybe if guys have ever grown coffee plants, you got some advice on growing that too, but that's another plant I'd like to get some experience with. Okay, Wickershire says peppermint is coming up. One of 15 seeds. Uh, do you have any other mint plants? That's what I'm curious. I have a few. I got peppermint. I have chocolate mint, and then I got mojito mint running right now. And what's so cool about the peppermint or the mint family. Also with like basil, there's so many different scent and flavor profiles. That's one of my favorite thing about those types of plants. Just it's almost like a bottomless well on choices, and they're so different in the scents. And I mean, the plant looks very similar, but just that flavor and scent is vastly different. Wickershire says now a believer of lemon ball, crazy flavor. Yep. Jay says I'm considering growing ginger indoors for a treatment. Interesting. Yeah, if you start growing it, maybe we can share some tips on growing indoors. Yeah, Wickershire. So I did, just from reading up on the coffee plants, I did see they have a crazy long time for germination. So that's okay. I mean, I've started enough plants from seeds and germinated enough stuff where I think the plant that takes the longest for me right now is probably carrots. Carrots, I don't know. It's crazy for such a small carrot seed. It can take 3 weeks for that seed to germinate. So patience. See, Michael says I grew up in Orlando. We had coffee plants and landscapes here. There's a native wild coffee there. Ooh, that I'm when we get off this live stream, which is gonna be here shortly, I'm gonna have to search for that because that's I didn't know there was native coffee plants in that area. And what I'm curious to know is, are those actual native to Orlando, that Florida area, or is that something that was domesticated or just got kind of or brought in, imported, and then kind of grew on and on, or took off, I suppose. But anyway, okay. Wild Tennessee mountain mint, peppermint, spearmint, chocolate mint, a few others. Yeah. Yep, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Appreciate it. Well, that brings us to the end of our live stream today. Uh, that was fun getting. I was going to talk more about the cation exchange. We're going to get a little bit of that next week, but there was a good time to talk about types of flowers and pollinators and whatnot. So the terms for the day are perfect flower, imperfect flower. Um, yep, and then pollinators are friends. If you see flowers, especially female flowers that are aborting, so if you see little cucumber plants on the ground, that means either failed to pollinate or you had some type of climate environment change that stressed the plant out to where it decided that it's not a good idea to reproduce right now. So it's going into survival mode. So those are things that we covered today. Next week, like I said, I'd like to talk a little bit more cation exchange, but really on a grower level that really makes sense. And then I wanted to start talking a little bit more about chemistry because depending on that cation exchange capacity of your soil, what type of soil you have, maybe in your containers, maybe you got peat moss or coconut coir or some other type of growing medium, that's going to determine what type of fertilizer you use. And when definitely want to talk about fertilizers because that's something to up your game about what your plants need. It's going to be dependent on different types of factors. And we need to know a little bit about chemistry. So if you enjoyed high school chemistry, which I didn't, I enjoyed it in college because I needed to know it. We won't go crazy deep into it, but we will talk a little bit about how different types of nutrients, so how nitrogen, different forms of nitrogen interact in your soil. So the teaser for that is we have a couple different nitrogen forms, nitrate, and then ammonium. So if you live in the Midwest, United States, or Canada, and you see the farmers towing ammonia tanks behind them, there's a reason why they're using ammonia, and it's the nitrogen value in that tank that they're putting into the ground. So we're going to talk a little bit about that next week. Um, and kind of get into how those types of chemical elements interact in the soil, potting soil, and how your plants actually take them up. So maybe we'll dispel some myths too about do eggshells really work for calcium on your tomato plants? That's going to be interesting conversation. But um, anyway, looking forward to see you next week. Thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to growing with you this year.